give everyone a couple minutes to enter our virtual room. We would love if you'd look in the chat box and share a little bit about where are you in your ESG journey. You'll see a poll as you enter the room, and we would just love to hear from you. Where are you? Are you you already have some sustainability resources? You're just starting to think about your plan. You have a fantastic plan. You're just here for more tips and strategies. So again, welcome to our webinar, ESG, How to Build a Plan. We'll give everyone just another minute to enter the room. We're so happy to have you here. Thank you. Great. Well, I will leave the poll up while people are entering the room, but please join us. And again, I would like to welcome you. Leading today's panel will be Colette Temmink. Colette is the Chief Strategy and Product Officer for Blue Skyre. Before joining, she has vast industry experience. Before joining Blue Skyre, she was former president of Property Services Eden, head of global head of integrated facilities management for Cushman & Wakefield, and senior vice president and chief administrative officer for Apollo Education Group. She is also well known in the facilities community. She serves on the board of directors for the International Facilities Management Association, or IFMA, as many of you know. She's a top-rated faculty member for Cornet Global and many other certifications. So Colette, thank you so much, and welcome to our panel today.
Terrific. Thanks, Alex. I appreciate it. And we are recording today's session, just as a reminder for everyone. And we hope to get to questions at the end. So again, welcome to today's presentation. It's really on the intelligent way to create and implement an ESG program. Alex mentioned I am with Blue Skyre. We are a organization that is led by kind of global leaders, and we help corporations succeed in today's dynamic environment, as well as corporate real estate departments. So through our software advisory and services, we help kind of design, implement, measure, and report, and help our clients accomplish their goals, whether that be in corporate real estate or ESG. So I'm excited to be here, and I'm really excited to be here because we have two great panelists who are also with me today. Why don't we start out with Jenna Rowe, who actually is the Chief Sustainability Lead at CSI, or Closure Systems International. She really leads the ESG effort and strategy and the design and implementation of that. And Jenna has over 15 years of experience in sustainability and ESG, and she's helped many global corporations with their ESG programs, kind of developing those programs. So she has a wealth of experience in this area. She is also on the board of the Green Building Institute. So Jenna, again, thank you for your time and welcome. We also have Dean Stanberry, who many of you may know who are on this webinar. He is a second vice chair for the International Facilities Management Association, obviously called IFMA for many of you. And Dean has over 20 years experience with facilities management, whether that's portfolio strategy, program management, sustainability. Is a wealth of knowledge with organizations, whether it's energy consulting firms and JLL. But he is also a published author, and he has recognized for his contributions to the field of facilities management. So again, Dean, welcome, and Jenna, thank you both again for your time today. Hopefully this is going to be an informative discussion for the audience, but why don't we go ahead and start with kind of why ESG, why it's important. And, we've been talking about sustainability for, decades now. We started with really consumption areas of energy, waste, and water. And now we're starting to hear more and more dialogue around ES and G, and really the S and the G, the social and the governance pieces. But it is top of mind for many CEOs. It's top of mind for governments in today's environment. And really looking at this from a holistic standpoint, making sure that you're not just focused on E, which is, energy, waste, and water in those areas, but also social and governance. And we'll go through a lot more detail on what those particular areas really mean for a corporation and really mean for corporate real estate. So Why don't we start, Jenna, with you? I know you have certainly a wealth of knowledge in this area. You have worked with many corporations. Why create a plan? Why create a full holistic ESG program? And what are the benefits to a company? I think you're on mute. Still on mute. Yeah.
Okay. So basically, Colette, you want to take a very holistic and high-level strategic approach to ESG because ad hoc programs miss a lot, right? So if anyone's heard the phrase that the whole is worth more than the sum of its parts, that's really very telling around ESG because you really cannot maximize any of your opportunities, nor can you really fully address any of the identified risks if you're not doing it from an integrated approach, which is totally cross-functional across your organization and both top down and bottom up for it to be effective. So it's not just, the plan, Colette, but it's all of the moving pieces in that plan and communicating it that is so critical.
So when we look at the benefits to an organization, I know when we look, up and down the organization, but really around why we move from just sustainability into kind of social and governance, right? Really looking across the organization. It wasn't just about the consumption in your greenhouse gases, but it really was, a good citizen of the world and other areas in governance. And really focusing on that for a corporation. Do you see a lot of benefits when they put programs like that together and look more broadly?
It's a big differentiator, right? It's not just differentiating the company to consumers or to B2B customers, but right now there's an absolute war for top talent. So if you want to hire and attract really motivated people, you have to align with their values. And right now, most of the talent out there, myself included, we want to look at a company that is absolutely vested and committed to driving positive change. And I feel like it's important to understand that is absolutely relevant and important no matter what industry you're in, no matter what type of company you are or how big you are, right? From a one-person consulting firm hiring their first intern to a Fortune 100 or Global 100 company, Colette, this is absolutely relevant and the time is now.
Yeah, agreed. So Dean, it kind of brings us to kind of your viewpoint on this as well, on some of the benefits that you're seeing, even in the professional world for facility managers kind of learning this. Are you seeing them focus on just the E or the S and the G as well?
Well, I think early on, certainly the environmental piece is going to be more within the facility management domain. Social and governance will play a role, but I think initially everybody's kind of focused on that environmental component. And as we know, ESG is sort of an evolution of the corporate social responsibility reporting, which had no standards, had some issues and some flaws related to it. And so now we're starting to see that there's some emerging standards. There's going to be regulation coming out. So these are things that are going to kind of put people on notice that it's not just an optional activity anymore. It's going to be a required activity. And there will be some expectations around the quality of the data that's being reported. So it's getting noticed, not just in facilities, but all across to, the organizations. Every facet of the organization will be involved.
And Colette, can I just add on there? Because we discussed this with Dean as well. That this is critical when it comes to expanding, what a facility manager is informed about, right? Because a lot of times they're left in the dark for these things. And it's just important to think about that they're really at the hub of what's happening in buildings and really at the center of data. So, what Dean says is so true. And it's important to make sure that we're sharing these changes and these trends with our FMs.
No, great point. Which also brings us to the confusion in the industry, right? So, Dean, you touched upon standards, and you're absolutely right. And even for experts in the field, it can be daunting and it can be confusing. Where are the standards? Where do we go for information? I mean, what's your perspective on kind of the industry? We have frameworks, we have reporting structures, we have agencies. The good news is there's a lot of talent focused on it, but it does tend to create more confusion.
Right. And outside of like a chief sustainability officer, few employees within a given organization have had any exposure to this level of reporting. So unless an individual has a personal interest, they probably know very little about things like the UN Sustainable Development Goals or the greenhouse gas protocols. And you're inundated with acronyms like CDP and GRESB and GRI, SASB and TCFD. They're all foreign terms. And rating agencies have very little meaning outside of the finance organization and the C-suite. So those are some challenges to the rank and file of the organization. While most employees will not need to deal directly with many of these governing principles and frameworks and rating agencies, they will need to invest some time to figure out what their role is within the ESG reporting framework and what reporting data will be expected from them. A key point across the organization will be the quality and the credibility of the data that's being sent upstream for ESG reporting. Now that the SEC is moving to impose ESG disclosure regulations, entities will need to ensure the accuracy of their reporting. But when for example, facility manager may report on energy use or air quality, but there will be questions about, well, when were those sensors that's giving you this data, when were they last calibrated? And can that facility manager attest to the veracity of the data that they're providing? So lots of issues that I think are going to be coming at people very fast, and they're going to have answers for those questions.
Yeah, certainly the auditability of the data and the information. Absolutely right. And more important, when they create that baseline, how they're creating it, and frankly, what's the data governance around how they're gathering that data and who's touching it and who's managing it, right? So similar to other areas, but maybe a little more robust in this area, just like your accounting. Terrific. So that kind of brings us to, okay, now we shed a little light on the confusion of the industry and brought some clarity there. But really, where does a company start? There's a lot of discussion around materiality and the UN SDGs and other areas, whether they want to engage stakeholders or they really want to just kind of do one-off initiatives. Where should a company start? I mean, Jenna, you have guided companies through this journey quite a few times now, but what's your advice?
The first thing I tell everybody is that it doesn't have to be, right, overwhelming. Start where you are with what you have, right, and see what you can accomplish with that. And the first thing that you need to understand are what is driving this. What's motivating your company or you individually, and usually that's some kind of stakeholder feedback, right? There's an expectation out there, whether it is an investor, maybe a private equity owner, or a B2B customer, right? Consumer feedback is a little harder, I think, to analyze, right, and track, because I change my mind a lot about what I'm buying. But when it comes to B2B customers, they are the ones that are committing to those UN SDGs that Dean had referenced. And they are the ones that have basically made that commitment on behalf of their own operations and their supply chain. So we're at nearly 20,000 organizations who have committed their entire supply chain to do these things. And a lot of folks still don't really understand what that means for them. They don't know whether the SEC legislation that you referenced, Dean, is even relevant. So look at what's happening, and I call it globally. See what's happening at a global level with those standards, the frameworks, the UN, right? What is happening regionally with the laws and the legislation and the different municipal infrastructure changes, right? How does that impact you? And then look at what you're being asked from those stakeholders. How do those fit together? And usually at that point, you can pick a couple of key themes that will allow you to find the right consultant, right, to help you create a strong substantive materiality assessment. Because what every organization that is reporting on ESG is expected to be able to discuss very articulately is the financial implications of any risks caused by climate change and the business opportunities that are caused by climate change. So you need to know what those are, be able to talk about how you're addressing them, and move forward, right? That's really what drives your strategy. And I will say a final thing, since I love the fact that we get to talk about the SDGs. In those 17 SDGs, in 2020 were rolled out a set of 10 ambition benchmarks. And they're very, very clearly defined by scope. What has to be delivered in a company's operations if they've committed in their products and services or in their value chain. So if you know that you're delivering a product to someone who has made that commitment, or you fit in the value chain to a company that's made that commitment, you know what those customer expectations are. And those clearly defined goals and targets, right, are really going to be essential to incorporating those into your strategy. And from that point, it's now, how are we going to achieve them, right? And everybody's going to be at a different place, Colette. So that's why having the internal stakeholders engaged as well will make sure that you're not just setting a good target, but you're setting a realistic and science-based target, right? Because that's really where we're all heading right now.
It brings up a great point, even around kind of the baseline in this discussion around scope 1, 2, and 3, right? When we're looking at scope 1, it's what they directly emit, scope 2, obviously, even where they're acquiring that energy, and then scope 3, the indirect. And many times that is a multiple of scope 1 and 2. And there are many companies that are now just starting to think about scope 3. And that includes their supply chain, travel, all of those other areas. And there are many companies now receiving the letter that look, you're part of our family or carbon family, and what are you doing in this area, and how do we account for what you're attributing to kind of the GHG? And so many companies are just picking this up for the first time when they're realizing that they're part of this value chain with their customers. And so if you're a company and you're picking up ESG for the first time, you receive a letter that asks you a whole host of questions. Should they really start at this level of materiality and SDGs, or is it really just maybe answering the mail, so to speak, or really kind of taking the approach of let's really look at this at more holistically than we have in the past?
I think there are a lot of different opinions about that. Some of them are a little more emotional than others, but realistically, the only way right now to be a good partner is you have to respond, right? If you're getting a request, you have to address it. Now, it's perfectly acceptable to say, wow, this is new to us. Help us understand, right? And large companies, big purchasers are absolutely committed to training, right? Their vendors, because they know that they can't achieve their own science-based targets without the commitment of their supply chain, right? It's got to be total dedication towards these mutual global goals. And so, Colette, the truth is, no matter where you are in your journey, you can't ignore the global impact and the global commitments, because that is what's unifying all of these frameworks and standards and all of the confusion, really, right, that we referenced. Right. A lot of those frameworks have been consolidated over the last 2 to 5 years. In fact, the past 18 months, I've seen quite a few consolidating because investors and large purchasers are saying, oh my gosh, it's overwhelming. We can't do this. What do you want, right? Can make it consistent, make it understandable. And the investors also want to make sure that if they're looking, at different types of investments, the reporting frameworks are comparable. So Colette, I think that it's unavoidable to take a global position. And frankly, you're better off starting that way, because from there, you can drive down into understanding what's truly material to you. But if you don't understand the big picture, how can you truly quantify risks and business opportunities, right? Because you're leaving a lot off of the table for consideration.
Right. Good point. Which actually kind of brings us to our next point, right? So once you start on this program, understanding what you're committing to, because you said science-based targets, right? That includes scope 3. And many companies may recognize that or not, right? And when they're using the terms carbon, or carbon to their operations, or net zero. In fact, we just posted a blog on this very topic, but terminology is very important in getting it right. I mean, Dean, from your perspective, there's a big difference between net zero at a company and net zero at a building, and how they're establishing those goals and what they actually mean. And to your point earlier, right, if the SEC is now looking at this more closely, having that right terminology is going to be critical when people set public goals.
Yes, but let's start with what net zero actually means. So net zero refers to achieving a balance between the amount of greenhouse gas emissions produced and the amount removed from the atmosphere. So there are two paths towards achieving net zero that work in tandem. One is reducing existing emissions, and the other is actively removing greenhouse gases. So the term net zero is a bit intimidating as it conjures up these visions of having to move from where, the current state, where we are today, to a net zero state in like one giant step. But in reality, it's going to be a transition. And the technologies for large scale carbon removal do not exist yet. Progress is being made, but we really don't have the capability to remove carbon from the atmosphere in a large scale way. So for the most part, when we talk about net zero today, we're actually just referring to net zero emissions. So that's one point of clarification on the terminology. As for the reporting aspects, I believe corporate real estate will be reporting at the building or even the campus level. This is the likely case for property owners, but it will vary based on the type of property assets they hold. In any case, the roll-up of data from individual building systems and services is what comprises the building level reporting. And for building level reporting to be complete and accurate, all of the roll-up data sources must be complete and accurate. However, buildings are just one component of ESG reporting at the company level. So if I take an example of like a food service company, restaurants, they will include details about the sourcing of their ingredients, the food preparation, how it's served, how it's cleared, and the waste disposal, all of which is outside of the operation of the building itself. But decisions have to be made on who reports on the energy use for the kitchen equipment, the stoves and the ovens, or even the hot water used by the food service operation for like dishwashing versus the hot water used in restrooms and custodial operations. So enumerating all of the company level reporting components is a crucial first step in that ESG reporting journey. I think, that goes back to the materiality discussion.
Yeah, I mean, as practitioners in real estate, we tend to focus on the building, which is really around the energy, and now, embodied carbons, really understanding all the other pieces that go into this, and whether it's just an energy effort that you're putting on, or you're looking at carbon, which includes that embodied carbon, right? A lot of it sits in construction, or you're really going after net zero, all the greenhouse gases. And it's interesting because there is a difference between the building and the company level. On the company level, if it's a science-based target, you are now accounting for scope 3, which is very broad, and it's your supply base. And so if you look at that perspective from a building, I agree with you. Does that mean that repairs and maintenance and all of the other pieces, your supply chain of getting to the site, all of those pieces need to be accounted for? And I think it goes to this global standard that we're in industry to some degree at its infancy, and everybody's getting smarter around how reporting takes place and the information that goes into this. And Jenna, you've probably seen this throughout your career, right? From where you were years ago in calculating GHG and carbon to where we are today. And I think we've certainly progressed a great deal, but we still have a ways to go.
Well, we do. And again, it's challenging if we're not clearly communicating all of the expectations across, the different roles, right? If we have to be cross-functional, we have to think about the people. And it's funny you say that we always look at these programs and think just about the buildings, but the truth is, those buildings are there so that people can do things. And that's a critical component of it. And I'll throw out, when it comes to the reporting element, tracking, right? Employee experience or occupant satisfaction, it's all part of stakeholder engagement, Colette. So, I love the fact that it really is with a lot of these new standards, focusing more on, connecting all those dots for people and making it more intuitive. I think that's, where we're going to see the most positive change.
Yeah, I think you're right, especially in, healthy building, indoor air quality, all of the other areas of the building that are important.
All connected. Yeah.
Which is a good segue into our next step. So we've talked a lot about kind of the industry and the standards and kind of where to start. But we put a program together at Blue Skyre, and hopefully this helps companies as well. But really think about where you should start when you're developing an ESG program, right? Really understand how you're structured, Are you getting executive support? Have you done the materiality assessment? Are you structured for success going forward? That's very different than making sure you have the right team or subject matter experts, which really come into play around implementation. But once you have that right structure to begin, how do you identify goals and opportunities? And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of things that you can do to support your ESG program. What are the right ones given, capital budgets and finite resources, and making sure that what you are implementing has the greatest impact to your organization? And sometimes that takes a lot of time to evaluate those alternatives. And there's also technology that you can do it very quickly. But really, once you prioritize those initiatives, how do you bring the best to the table to implement those? And really looking across those subject matter experts, whether you're changing out the lighting in your office building or putting in solar or other areas. And then measuring that performance, with KPIs, having leading indicators so how they're performing in the midst of it, right? Do you need to make adjustments to your plan? Is something not achieving what you anticipated originally in terms of the impact or the return to the organization? But really, also looking at those areas of low cost, no cost, policies, procedures, looking at it more broadly, and then reporting. Once you've kind of structured for success, do you understand where you're reporting and what makes the most sense for your industry? Are you participating in the Carbon Disclosure Project? Are you a REIT that really wants to focus on GRESB or a corporate sustainability report, but really understanding where that information needs to go and ensuring that it's audible is important. And I know, just going back to both Jenna and Dean, you both have certainly put these plans together or helped companies. What are you seeing? I know there's a lot of discussion around other processes to go about doing this, right? Promoting and acting, but what's your perspective?
Well, I'll take a shot at it. For many, this may look vaguely familiar because in many ways, this process is analogous to the well-known quality improvement process description of plan, do, check, and act, or PDCA. You define a process, you implement the process, you confirm the process is being followed and measure the results, and then you act on the results to refine the process. So ESG reporting will not be sort of a one and done effort. It will evolve and become more comprehensive over time. But when first looking at something new, I like to revert back to the model of process, people, and tools, which is often depicted in sort of a triangular diagram with process at the pinnacle of the pyramid. Many organizations tend to attack these in exactly the wrong order. They go out and you find the shiny new object. Let's go get the tool that's going to solve all my organizational problems. But really, first, you must define and agree on the process that you need to follow, and then evaluate if you have the right people to execute the process. And then lastly, implement appropriate tools that support the process and the people. There's no real shortcuts here, and technology will not overcome a lack of skills, experience, and knowledge. So, I know tools are great things. But you got to have the right processes and the right people in place to really take advantage of them to really help you out in the end.
Agreed. And speaking of tools, we should probably post in the chat room a couple of tools for the audience. We'll set a link to the materiality, the guidelines from GRI, and then in addition to some from SDG information for you as well. But Jenna, from your perspective, what do you see here in the process?
Well, I think everything that Dean said is absolutely correct. And I honestly, whether you use, Six Sigma, DMAIC, or, ISO's Plan, Do, Check, Act, the key is that, there is continuous improvement, because it's not just that maybe we have a merger and acquisition, we gain new people, we earn new customers, we buy a building or dispose of a building, right? There are so many activities, not to mention procedural changes. And all have to be accounted for, right? So you can't really rest on your laurels. And even with all of the changes within maybe portfolio or organization, there are constant changes to these standards. They're being reviewed, right? They're under a lot of scrutiny right now. And there are new rules going out to, include certain reporting and avoiding greenwashing, right, as a KPI in these expectations. So I think that the best thing I can say is following these standards, making sure that regardless of which process or program you want to adopt, right, just stick with it. It's got to be consistent. And as long as, to your point, Dean, about having the right people and empowering them, right? Sometimes, we put people in a role. I've seen a lot of environmental health and safety people expanding their roles to take on more sustainability, facilities managers, operations managers, and frankly, a lot of folks in more of a receptionist or concierge role, right? Because they're right there and available to people, and folks have questions. How do I recycle this? What are we doing? What's the certification? If they've got a potential tenant coming through. So I think it's just important, again, to focus on stakeholder engagement, pick the process. Like Dean said, they're all pretty similar, right? So just stick with one and maintain your direction so that you don't see a lot of drift, right? Like Dean said, I've seen a lot of people start a program, see the next shiny object, and all of a sudden, some of the momentum they've gained actually falls away. So consistency is key.
Yeah, that's probably consistent in many areas, right? Following the shiny penny. How often do you see companies really kind of approaching this program? Is it annually, quarterly, or do you see just a variety all over?
I see them all over the place. And truthfully, my adamance about taking a global approach and thinking about it that way is based upon the fact that I've seen a lot of very big, well-known, and frankly, admirable companies say that they're launching a program. And Colette, it's little bits and pieces of things like, we're going to eliminate straws. Well, that's not a program. That is a single action. And it's focused on something that may not even be truly material to your business, right? So are you really talking to what makes your employees happy, or are you talking to what makes your B2B customers happy? But whatever you do, it needs to be tied to something strategic, and all of the pieces need to be cohesive together and make sense, right? All of these processes that we talked about, DMAIC, ISO, this fantastic, chart that we've got here, they're all very systematic, right? So ad hoc doesn't cut it. And I would say, Colette, people are all over the place. So the best advice we can give to any of them is take a deep breath, step back, right? And look at the big picture.
Agreed.
I would add that this probably needs to become it's a continuous process. If I take it back to building commissioning, which was often done as a one-time event, and then you wonder, 2 years, 5 years down the road, why your building isn't performing very well, is because you've never kept it operating at its design intent. So that we hear the term continuous commissioning now, which is using sensors and all sorts of other things to continually keep the building operating as it's intended. This is really no different. You're going to put some mechanisms in place, so you're collecting data, you're analyzing data. Your report may be a one-time a year event, your annual report. But whether you're doing quarterly checks or monthly checks, it can't be something that you just say, all right, it's now whatever, November, we need to put together our ESG report for the year and then go out and try to collect data. It has to be sort of that continuous data collection and analysis process, so that when you reach that point, you're just now assembling the facts into your report to say, this is where we are at this point in time, and it'll be different next time we report on it a year from now.
That is so true. And just because that's so critical, Colette and Dean, you just made my day saying that. Continuous information, continuous improvement, right? Continuous information, everything that an organization does. You had a tenant party, right, on the patio, and you did everything green, right? Maybe you had organic, locally sourced, snacks served, right? There was participation there. Which vendors were used? How did you dispose of the waste after it? How did you track the green event? How have you managed your emergency response planning and business continuity for all of your tenants in the building? What have you done with your annual fire drills, your your hurricane drills, whatever have you. What about your annual audits and safety inspections? Sharing that information is so critical, and collecting it as it occurs makes it much easier for a company to compile a truly accurate and comprehensive report, right? Because if you wait till the end of the year, to Dean's point, Colette, people can't remember what they ate yesterday, let alone, where they put something from a January event. And maybe that's unfair for some, but I think it's fair to say that continually updating and flowing that information, up to the reporting and back down to, hey, this is great, here's what we could do better next time. That's a big part of continuous improvement that I think is forgotten sometimes, that communicating the successes immediately.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of companies are doing things that they probably don't recognize that have value to ESG. And just putting the plan together that kind of helps that, information come to the forefront. One of the reasons why we had developed this ESG focus tool with Alavance was really that, there was some confusion around, do I implement a water saving program or a recycling, and in which locations? Really hard for practitioners to understand the true impact to the organization, and then to do that at a larger scale across thousands of opportunities. And so there was a real opportunity to use technology around helping them make some of those decisions and then capture that data and information, because it is becoming more complex for people to implement these programs. Because Jenna, just as you said, if you're having a party outside, there's so many things that you just captured that people have to think about that they may not be thinking about as part of their ESG. So great points.
Yeah. Another analogy I'll throw out there is that, I have my wedding anniversary comes once a year. But if I only did something about it on that one day of the year, I probably would not have stayed married for 30 years.
That is excellent. I love that analogy, Dean. That's great.
Yeah, well said. So this chart we put up, and Jenna, this is probably closer to some of the things that you're doing, but I hope it's a good example for people who have joined the webinar. If you take a look at ESG, right, and there are some commonalities and common areas that you see in the light blue, there are many real estate initiatives or corporate initiatives that you can do in each one of those categories. And when you're at that ground level of implementing those initiatives and identifying those that have the greatest impact to the organization, they also align with SDGs, right? So they do tend to flow both ways, and that is and can be confusing for many. But, Jenna, from your perspective, there's the ESG or the SDG principles. What are you seeing?
Well, I can't separate the two, to be honest with you. Just after the past 15 years, it's all connected to me, right? So I will say that the UN Global Compact started in 2020. Okay, so there's something not everybody understands, but a lot of this started way back before, right? The SDGs rolled out in 2015. And it is all connected. And Colette, a lot of incredibly smart people, 193 countries, right? And, all of the experts that they brought in and all of the private companies that have joined have really been collaborating, right? The whole deal is you must collaborate and partner to achieve the global goals without duplicating or hindering the efforts of others, right? It's all about collaboration. And I would just say that the important thing to understand and what's being focused on when I say global or when Dean references legislation is that it's no longer okay to approach an initiative or set a target based upon what, you feel at the time is feasible, right? At this point, companies, countries, consumers, and advocates, stakeholders everywhere are saying, you have to take responsibility and we're committing on your behalf, basically, right? So my point is it is all connected. Where you sit dictates what is most important to you and which of those connections you're going to want to focus on first. Just, again, take a deep breath, step back and take a global perspective when you're looking at this, Colette, because we're talking human rights, labor, working conditions, and business ethics. And all of this ties to, if you set a goal, there must be a carrot, a reward, like incentivizing your employees, but there also has to be a stick. So if you're not aligning to something that other people recognize, you're not setting goals with a carrot and a stick, and you're not proving that you're a good company doing good things with really good documentation, right? you're missing the boat. So without dictating, which direction you go or how to focus, Colette, at least understand the SDGs, because that dictates a lot of those priorities for you and will make your path a lot easier.
I think you bring up a great point, right? One, sometimes we look at things like it's a financial measure, and sometimes we look at things like it's an impact, one's global community, one's corporate and financial and risk. But you're right, having that ability to step back and look more broadly across what you're trying to achieve and why you're trying to achieve it is critical. And then how to engage, right? We've put some things in the chat for folks to find some of these documents with more detail, but really engaging, reaching out to people in the industry. Most of us are willing to help or at least answer questions at any time. So agreed. I know, Dean, it looked like you were going to say something here.
Yeah, related to this, I happen to live in a city that's actually enacting energy efficiency mandates. And in a conversation with a colleague that was complaining about, how can they do this? We can't, companies can't afford to do this and blah, blah, blah. And I said, this is not a surprise, right? We implemented the benchmarking ordinances 6 years ago. And when they put those in place, they said there will be mandates coming. So, if you've been sort of had your head in the sand the whole time and ignoring it, hoping the problem would go away, I don't buy it. Earth Day started 50 years ago. We had people starting to, ring the bell, sound the siren 50 years ago. And we've known about these things for a long time. So I just don't buy that we, can come out of the woodwork and say, oh, gee, this is a total surprise. It caught me off guard. No, it didn't. You just chose to ignore it until it becomes a mandate and then complain about it. So, sorry.
Regulatory requirement, right? Yeah. Good point. So brings us to how do you make decisions around, which initiatives to fund and to implement? And I know this is just kind of our approach to it, and we've been focused on, what are the steps? And we partnered with Alivance, which really is a recognized leader in decision-making software and technology. And we kind of created ESG focus with them. And it was really to help companies look across their ESG opportunities and then really to prioritize, or a prioritization tool that companies could really use to kind of guide their actions, really create impact and align to their organizational goals. And it uses kind of this structured approach, right, and technique, but it also combines that with proprietary algorithms and enables you to see and evaluate just an enormous amount of data very quickly. And then really deciphering, what investments should be made, given the resources that we have, in what initiatives that will give us that greatest impact that does align to our organization. And it starts with just the strategy, really, right? The scorecard of understanding what you're trying to achieve, aligning the organization around what is important to the organization and what you're trying to achieve, right? Making sure that everyone is on the same page, and then quantifying what those opportunities are. And certainly there's going to be regulatory requirements that are going to certainly move to the front of the list. But, if you're really only looking at low cost, no cost, and you don't have much capital to spend, how do you align resources and those resources that may be passionate around ESG and engaging them, right, in the recycling programs and others? And then looking at all those opportunities, scoring them for the alignment, and then kind of creating the optimal ESG plan. And you can continuously evaluate this on an ongoing basis. If certain initiatives are not performing the way they were originally anticipated, how do you shift that capital to others for impact, and really having a program that is ongoing, that really isn't, as you've eloquently said before, right, kind of one and done. It really is a program that you can continuously look at and adds value to the organization. But this does follow many of the things that you're you're doing every day, right, Jenna, in how you're making decisions and how you're engaging the organization. I mean, what's your perspective on this and kind of creating a plan?
My perspective is this is spot on. And I'll add, obviously we're trying to keep the slides clean, right? And we don't want people trying to read and listen at the same time. So there's a lot of stuff we can't put on there.
Right.
But the key is that it's important for communication to have a program like this, right? Where you are stopping, let's compare, let's discuss, let's gut check, but also when you're looking at those priorities, once you've hit certain milestones, Colette, your process has to change, right? Because now, wait a minute, okay, we thought this was a priority, but hey, we've done spectacular. Okay, what's next, right? So having a process like this where you can continually go back and maybe tweak certain parameters, right? And say, well, we're prioritizing this now. Next on the list is XYZ. Maybe it's water, right? Maybe it is supply chain reporting. Maybe it's which of our suppliers have a science-based target, or, sometimes we'll see big companies, Colette, that would use a process like this and some similar decision-making tools to not just determine what they're going to invest in, but large, consumer product and personal goods companies are also committing to invest in supply chain projects, right? Because they want their suppliers to hit those same goals, to achieve their science-based targets. Right. So this is actually fantastic, for multi-level programs that you're looking at, and gives you the flexibility to adapt as your program evolves and you achieve some of those goals. I think it's fantastic.
Good sense. How about you, Dean?
When you first showed me this slide in particular, the thing that jumped out at me is that, it's the plan, do, check, act again, right? So steps 1, 2, and 3 are the plan and do component. Step 4 is the check, and step 5 is the act. The only thing we didn't do is take the little road there and loop it back around to step 1 to make that full loop, because you do start it over again. Like you said, not one and done. And when you say create the optimal ESG plan, I would probably just put the caveat, it's the optimal plan for this year. But next year, it's going to be a different optimal plan, right?
Yeah. I mean, with technology changing as fast as it is, and we're seeing more and more progress even in construction, right? Or the materials that we're using. You're right. There is this ongoing evaluation of things that you could implement or should be implementing. So, yeah, agreed. Yeah. So this brings us to Q&A, and hopefully everybody's had a chance to put in their questions in the chat. And I know we've had some emailed to us earlier, so I'm going to go ahead. One of them that came up, Jenna, this is probably a good question for you, which is, why is it important to engage stakeholders? And this sometimes, as you know, organizations may be reluctant to engage, especially external stakeholders in this process. And so why is that so important?
Well, because I can tell you that you can do a lot of research about your stakeholder and think that you've got a really good idea of what they want and what they're focused on. But you have to check that, because they're just like any other, B2B customer or other stakeholder. Everything isn't out there and transparent. You need to validate. So, to give an example, I may look at one of my customers and think, okay, I understand what they're trying to do from a product perspective, but I didn't look at their value chain expectations, right? So I didn't realize that, oh, wait, now it's not only CDP reporting that they're asking of my company, they also want us to start, a renewable energy program, right? In addition to science-based targets. So you need to constantly check back with those stakeholders, and it's critical to engage internal and external, right? Because internal stakeholders help you achieve whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, right? To address the expectations. But those external stakeholders, those stakeholders are the people that influence your access to money, right? They drive legislation and policy. You need to understand that so that you know what to plan for next, because, just like we're saying, we are constantly evolving. The world is changing around us, and you have to be aware of what's happening outside your organization just as much as you need to know what's happening inside.
Well said.
There's I'll take this back to what, the 1970s. The economist Milton Friedman, famously stated that, corporations exist to benefit the shareholder, not the stakeholder. And that caused a mega shift in how Wall Street and everybody treated, corporations, which are now the equivalent of an entity, of a person.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're seeing now is that shift back to saying, no, you got to, it is about the stakeholders, and those stakeholders exist at multiple levels. It's your investors, it's your consumers, it's your employees. And so that may be sort of a rough transition back to being a stakeholder-driven organization as opposed to a shareholder-driven approach. But this is some of the things that's causing that shift back and away from being totally driven by shareholder and profit-driven. There's got to be equity involved here, and that's going to be a tough transition, I think, for some organizations.
Yeah, I think it even goes back to the earlier point that Jenna mentioned, which is really around employees, right, and talent, and having an organization that's going to attract that talent going forward. Which kind of brings us to our next question that came in. And Dean, this is probably a great one for you. What are you seeing in terms of kind of facility managers and core competencies? Do you see ESG becoming a core competency of facility managers?
I certainly see it being incorporated into the existing core competencies. I don't really see it as a, quote, competency of its own, because it's embedded in many of our existing competencies, which include finance and technology and leadership and sustainability. So it kind of spreads across all of those areas, operations and maintenance. We've had a similar discussion and some debate around, workplace strategy. Is it a core competency? Is it a separate, job, or is it, part of an existing job? And I think that's what we'll see. If we look back to the origin of sustainability, the early 2000s, all of a sudden we had the job sustainability manager, coming about, and lots of people being hired into those positions. You don't really see that as a separate job anymore, because it's become part of everybody's job. And I think over time we'll see some similar things here, is that it's not really a unique job. It just becomes part of everyone's job to be involved in, the concepts of ESG reporting, everything that underlies the environmental and the social and the governance components becomes everybody's responsibility.
And Colette, I'll add on to that, because it is an awesome question. And what Dean said is true, but there's actually a requirement for this, right? So Criterion 21 for all participants to the United Nations Global Compact, Criterion 21 is all about stakeholder engagement. You must engage with your shareholders. You must engage with your management and your board, but you must also embed ESG in the roles and responsibilities of all of your employees. You must promote it through your products and services, and you must advocate for it publicly. So any of the nearly 20,000 organizations that have committed have also committed to engaging all of their stakeholders at those levels, right? And frankly, embedding it in the roles and responsibilities of all the employees, that's pretty clear. So I think it totally reinforces what Dean said. It's everybody's job, and we just have to all get to the point where we have that same perception and understanding.
Right, just like safety, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, exactly like safety.
I think when you see that it is now embedded into annual performance plans, maybe it's not a dominant piece, but there's one or two line items in there, bullet points that relate to this. Then it's percolated through the organization, because people, culture, organizational cultures, people always fall back on what they're going to get measured on at the end of the year. And so if it's not in their performance plan, it's not going to get done, or it's the first thing that gets dropped, when push comes to shove. So it has to be something that finds its way into everybody's, performance plan, from the C-suite, down to the lowest part of the organization. They should have something in there that makes it part of their daily responsibilities.
And frankly, that is part of the reporting, right? Because CDP asks you, how are you incentivizing, ESG in your compensation plan? So again, Dean's spot on. It's no longer, something to think about or nice to do. It's pretty much becomes table stakes.
Yeah. It's, it started with those champions in the organization, and now it needs to be the fabric of the organization.
Oh yeah. Well,
so that kind of brings us, a couple minutes here. And I, just because I'm lucky enough to have both of you as panelists and your expertise, but is there any advice that we haven't touched upon or that you would give people that join the webinar are going to listen to the recording afterwards around creating a program? And I guess what is your pearls of wisdom that you can share before we kind of end today's session?
My personal pearls of wisdom is that the United Nations Global Compact webpage has a library full of fantastic resources. And I tell anybody I can, start with the free stuff, right? Learn, right? Read. There is some amazingly smart people out there that have developed really great tools, and they're very clearly defined, right? That say, this is how we did our engagement program, or this is how we did water conservation. And they're very easy to replicate, and they encourage you to do so. Right. So this is the one time when, copying somebody else's work is not just okay. It is strongly encouraged and recommended. And some of the tools like the SDG Impact Manager allow even a small company to get started understanding, what's material to them. How do I measure impact? What do I focus on with absolutely no upfront cost? And because it was created in partnership with the UN and B Lab, right? That it's pointing you in the right direction. So taking that global approach, using those credible tools, I feel like Colette gives you a really strong start, no matter who you are or where you are right now.
And we've put the link in the chat for those folks that want
Excellent.
the link to this.
Yeah, and I have to agree with Jenna on, don't wait for somebody to come tap you on the shoulder and say, where is your ESG reporting data? You better learn a little bit about what it means. Learn how to spell ESG. Some people can't. And learn a little bit about what might be required of you in your current role. And if you change jobs, it may change as well. The other thing would be to, look within your organization. Try to figure out, who owns ESG reporting. Where is your organization in terms of putting together a plan? Ask some questions about, what's going to be expected of you and when. Are we going to be doing ESG reporting in 2022, or are we working on our plan so that we can do it in 2023? It's not a matter of if, it's when. So, certainly if you're a publicly traded company, I think the SEC disclosure regulations are going to, force that. But even privately held companies are going to be held to this, because you have consumers, you may have investors in some way, shape, or form, but it's going to be forced on you. If you don't pick up the baton and carry it forward yourself, somebody's going to be handing it to you and say, "Here you go. It's your turn to join the race."
I agree. My advice, this is our opinions today, but there are so many experts in the field, and everybody's, from at least my experience, wanting to help the industry rise. So there are a lot of resources available to individuals. I think even taking the step of listening to today's webinar, right, and learning more and engaging in those resources, and frankly, reaching out to experts to help you along your journey. They're more than willing, and you can certainly reach out to any of the three of us at any time. But wanted to really thank everyone for joining today. Appreciate your time. Thank you again. And hopefully we'll see you on our next webinar. Appreciate it.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.